All right.
No prompt.
Look right on it.
We are back. 2 Samuel. I'm sorry I missed you all last week on Ash Wednesday, which feels like a million years ago. And I understand we did 2 chapters and we're on chapter 16. And I brought 2 translations that you don't have. I don't mean that in a rude way. I'm saying give you something else to think about as you're looking at the text. So I brought my Robert Alter book, which I think David does have actually, or was thinking about it at least. If you do have it, David? Yep. So I've got that one, which is the latest, greatest translation in my collection. And then I have a slightly older one that I must have picked up in seminary, the Jewish Study Bible by multiple editors. So I'm going to start with that one. And I'll read from 1 to 14. We're in chapter 16. David had passed a little beyond the summit when Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, came toward him with a pair of saddled asses, carrying 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisin, 100 cakes of figs, and a jar of wine. The king asked Ziba, "What are you doing with these?" Ziba answered, "The asses are for your majesty's family to ride on, the bread and figs are for the attendants to eat, and the wine is to be drunk by any who are exhausted by the wilderness." "And where is your master's son?" the king asked. "He is staying in Jerusalem," Ziba replied to the king, "for he thinks that the house of Israel will now give him back the throne of his grandfather." The king said to Ziba, "Then all that belongs to Mephibosheth is now yours." And Ziba replied, "I bow low. Your majesty is most gracious to me." As King David was approaching Bahurim, a member of Saul's clan, a man named Shimei, son of Gera, came out from there, hurling insults as he came. He threw stones at David and all King David's courtiers. Courtiers? I don't know. While all the troops and all the warriors were at his right and at his left. And these are the insults that Shimei hurled. Get out, you criminal, you villain. The Lord is paying you back for all your crimes against the family of Saul, whose throne you seized. The Lord is handing over the throne to your son Absalom. You are in trouble because you are a criminal." Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why let that dead dog abuse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head." But the king said, "What has this to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? He is abusing me only because the Lord told him to abuse David. And who is to say, why did you do that?" David said further to Abishai and all the courtiers, "If my son, my own issue, seeks to kill me, how much more the Benjaminite? Let him go on hurling abuse, for the Lord has told him to. Perhaps the Lord will look upon my punishment and recompense me for the abuse Shimei has uttered today." Nice thinking, David. David and his men continued on their way while Shimei walked alongside on the slope of the hill, insulting him as he walked and throwing stones at him and flinging dirt. The king and all who accompanied him arrived exhausted, and he rested there. Let us pause. I'm sorry I couldn't help with my running commentary throughout, but there is something slightly comical about it, and also something slightly, there's some dread here if you know what's coming with Absalom. And I think David is like, if this is a message from God, I can take it. I can take the slurs and the slander. That's nothing. If that's going to get me right with God, so be it. And that's what I cracked at that line. Perhaps the Lord will look upon my punishment and recompense me for the abuse he has uttered today. David's like, maybe that's all my punishment. Maybe this is it. I've learned my lesson.
Maybe it'll keep me ahead even.
Yeah, maybe I'll be in really good graces with God. Wow. I was going to say too, I can do the Hebrew words. I can't do the French-looking English words. I don't know what word you have for courtier. Courtier.
It says servant.
Servant.
Oh, was
that would have been much better.
That in verse 6 when David's giving counsel. Mine says officials.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Courtier has other implications. It's like it's not just necessarily officials, but hangers on. It's kind of the sycophants that hang on and
it's his posse.
Yeah, his posse, good. Yeah.
His
And
entourage.
this whole transactional belief that God punishes, and then when he punishes enough, then maybe, or if we submit to it or whatever, this is not just an ancient belief. This is a belief that a lot of contemporary people have as well, that they take
Yeah.
seriously. Yeah. So the idea that when bad things happen to us, it's because God is punishing us, and if we submit in the right way, then maybe the punishment will end.
Right.
Just reading a thing about the concept of redemptive suffering that like
Light reading.
Well, it was about this. It was in the Times, but this little girl who they consider, she's not officially a saint in the Catholic Church, but she's called the Little Cajun Saint, and she had been very ill outside of New Orleans. But they talked about when she was in pain, and they couldn't really do much about it. But the priest would sit with her and say, "Who, like your suffering can help other people, and so who are we suffering for today?" And she said it would help her to think about someone else she wanted good things to happen to.
Right.
And she'd dedicate her suffering to the other people.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was it's a little bit different. David wants to benefit himself, right? He's like, if I'm going to suffer, maybe it'll help me in the long run. But I just thought it was an interesting idea.
Yeah.
That suffering could benefit other people too.
Sounds like
that's a big part of Roman Catholicism, that the concept of redemptive suffering for others and for you as well. People like Richard Rohr and Mother Teresa. They're big proponents of this, almost to the point where sometimes some of them were criticized a bit for not working hard to relieve suffering, because they believe that suffering helps you grow and is redemptive in that. But almost the idea that no spiritual growth basically ever comes without some kind of suffering or some kind of traumatic event in our lives. I'm not sure I go clearly. Yeah, right. Well, I'm not sure I go clearly. I'm not sure I'm comfortable entirely with how far they go, but it is something to consider. Yeah. So
I was also thinking that if there was nothing they could do to relieve her suffering, that at least because she talked about how it was giving her something to sort of keep her sane, right. Thinking that it was going to benefit someone. And I feel like if you're imposing it purposefully, that's a whole other situation.
Yeah.
But if you can't fix it anyway, I'm sorry.
I just think we have to be a little careful when we start making suffering something that necessarily comes from God. Sometimes that's where I get a little cautious about this, that God does these things to people in order to benefit others or something. God sends these kind of things to you, and I think that can lead us down some bad pathways when we think in those terms. Not that I'm not arguing with the fact that the example of patient suffering and godly suffering can speak to people, yes, but I'm just sure we've got to be careful where we're attributing that to.
Yeah,
it's a great point. And a lot of this stems, of course, from just your theology of the cross and what is Jesus going through on the cross? Is it performative suffering, or is it redemptive suffering? I think Mother Teresa and others might say, well, they might point to what's happening on the cross as kind of their example, but there's a danger in that, just as there is in the theology of the crucifixion, that is this God inflicting the suffering or demanding that's a strand of atonement theology. Is this some kind of punishment that demands a retribution or not,
or is it suffering that humanity and its wickedness has caused, and yet right. God can work all things to our benefit, right?
Exactly.
That he can find something good even when humans have done something horrible.
Yeah.
And in the case of Jesus, it was suffering that he chose to allow for himself. It wasn't something he was forced to do against his own will, but that he was willing to take on the martyrdom. Yeah.
All right.
Well, it led us astray. Sorry.
Short. No, that's a good astray always. Let me finish up the chapter here from the Jewish Study Bible because there's some big Jewish names which I eat up. I eat them for breakfast. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, arrived in Jerusalem together with Ahithophel. Yeah, that's close enough. No, you did great. When Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came before Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king, long live the king." But Absalom said to Hushai, "Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why didn't you go with your friend?" "Not at all," Hushai replied. "I am for the one whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, and I will stay with him. Furthermore, whom should I serve if not David's son? As I was in your father's service, so I will be in yours." Absalom then said to Ahithophel, "What do you advise us to do?" And Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Have intercourse with your father's concubines." Well, this took a dark turn. "Whom he left to mind the palace. And when all Israel hears that you have dared the wrath of your father, all who support you will be encouraged." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and Absalom lay with his father's concubines, with the full knowledge of all Israel. In those days, the advice which Ahithophel gave was accepted like an oracle sought from God. That is how all the advice of Ahithophel was esteemed by both David and Absalom.
Wow.
If we can briefly make this this Bible study and this recording, what do I want to say, R-rated, I'm going to gently take a peek at that. The translation I have, "so they pitched a tent," I do actually think is a Jewish Hebrew euphemism for sex, kind of like spreading your cloak. It also happens to be a term we still use to this day. So I think there's some playfulness in the wording of Hebrews intentionally to kind of dance around what's happening here. But your different translations may have some light on that too. It tells you more about the editors or your translators and how comfortable they are talking about sex in the Bible or not.
Both of mine say pitch a tent.
Yeah.
I was going to read something from my
good. Yes.
Yeah, I'm from the NRSV. It says, "To sleep with a member of the harem is to claim the throne. Hence, by having relations with David's concubines, Absalom makes his claim to kingship emphatic. He also fulfills Nathan's prophecy in 12:12, which was likely written with Absalom's act in view."
Mm.
The message says, the message says, "So Absalom pitched a tent up on the roof in public view and went in and slept with his father's concubines."
Yeah, to the point. So what I'm trying to say is that the tent, the rising of the tent, is a sexual euphemism for Absalom to say, pardon the expression, I'm open for business.
Right.
It's fertile ground here. And similarly, this the whole sequence. This is what Robert Alter says: "The tent on the roof ensures sexual privacy, but Absalom's entering into it with each of the women is a public display of the act of cohabitation. Either this is to be accepted as an unrealistic event, given there are 10 concubines, or Absalom is supposed to be not only beautiful in hirsute, but also a sexual athlete. His act, of course, is a fulfillment of Nathan's dire curse in chapter 12, like Leslie was saying. As several commentators have noted, the usurper's sexual transgression of David's women takes place on the very palace roof from which his father first looked lustfully at Bathsheba." So there's some dramatic poetry kind of going on there too. Go up to the roof and get in trouble.
They need a family therapist.
They really do. They really
I'm not
do.
I'm not sure Ahithophel shines here, at least from my perspective, from modern perspectives. He seems to be a guy who's, although he is able to spiritualize it, he's definitely after the main chance and for self self-benefit. I think we see some of that going on today still among leaders and even religious leaders who kind of follow the political winds wherever they can for their own benefit. So I don't know. We'll see how this turns out. I don't imagine for him. I don't remember specifically, but anyway, yeah. So that's
you're right. There's it's these courtiers. It's sort of like Absalom's kind of got his own version of it. He's got a little bit of a entourage around him that's giving him some questionable advice, and it feels like machinations a little bit. You know, people are playing on the men, David and now his son Absalom. They're playing on their weaknesses, which is, we know from his father that the men in this family have a sexual weakness. You know, they cannot restrain themselves. So this is it's intentionally an echo to that Bathsheba moment too. And yeah, Ahithophel is not a name that that's lasted through history. So I'm imagining his time is going to be brief with us.
And of course, there's a great deal of cultural significance in this advice. You know, this is women were, and especially concubines, were possessions, and so with Absalom taking his father's concubines, he's taking the possessions, which were symbolic of his kingship. So
yes, yeah. That's right. That's why the text calls him a usurper in some places. All right. Would anyone like to read part of chapter 17? Maybe you can go to maybe verse 20.
I can read it from either the NRSV or the common Women's Bible.
Oh, okay. Whichever one you want.
I'll read it from the Women's Bible. I haven't done that for a while. And it's a 17?
Yes,
okay.
17, 1 to 20, if you can.
Then Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Let me pick 12,000 men, and I will go after David tonight. I will attack him while he is tired and weak. I will throw him into a panic. All the troops with him will run off. I promise to kill the king alone, and I will bring all the people back to you like a bride comes back to her husband. It is only one man's life you are seeking. Everyone else can be at peace." This plan seemed excellent to Absalom and the Israelite elders. But Absalom said, "Call Hushai from Erech. Let's hear what he has to say as well." When Hushai from Erech arrived, Absalom said to him, "This is what Ahithophel has advised. Should we follow it or not? What do you say?" Hushai said to Absalom, "This time the advice Ahithophel has given isn't right. You know that your father and his men are warriors," he continued, "and they are desperate as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Your father is a seasoned fighter. He will spend the night with his troops. Even now, he has probably hidden himself in one of the caves or some other place. When some of the troops fall in the first attack, whoever hears it will say, am I on the right? Oh, yeah. The soldiers who follow Absalom have been defeated. Then even the bravest soldier, whose heart is like a lion's, will melt in fear because all Israel knows that your father is a warrior and that those who are with him are brave. So I will advise that that all the Israelites from Dan to Beersheba, a group as countless as sand on the seashore, be summoned to join you, and that you yourself go into battle. When we attack him, wherever he might be, we will fall on him like dew that falls on the ground. No one will survive, not him, not one of the soldiers who are with him. If he retreats into a city, all Israel will bring ropes to the city, and we will drag it into a valley until not even a pebble of it will be found." Then Absalom and everyone in Israel agreed. The advice of Hushai from Erech is better than Ahithophel's advice. This was because the Lord had decided to counter Ahithophel's good advice so that the Lord could bring disaster on Absalom. Hushai told the priests, Zadok and Abiathar, here's what Ahithophel advised Absalom and the Israelite elders, and here's what I advised. Now, send word immediately to David and tell him, don't spend the night in the desert plains. You must cross over immediately. Otherwise, the king and all the troops who are with him will be swallowed up whole. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were standing by it and Rogel. A female servant would come and report to them, and they would then travel and report to King David because they couldn't risk being seen entering the city. But a boy saw them and reported to Absalom. So the two of them left immediately, came to a man's house at Bahurim. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. The man's wife took a covering and spread it over the well's opening, then scattered grain over it so no one would notice. When Absalom's servant came to the woman at the house, they demanded, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? The woman told them, they crossed over the stream. They looked for them, but found nothing, so they returned to Jerusalem.
All right, let's stop there for a second. I think if your ears turned up at the verse in the middle of verse 14, and the Lord had ordained to overturn Ahithophel's good counsel in order for the Lord to bring evil upon Absalom, I think it's fair to say that that's a redacting commentary, an opinion of the writer, perhaps trying to shoehorn a lot of this palace intrigue into some kind of theology there, which is, as we've kind of established many times, could be a really difficult theology of understanding that God is bringing evil upon anyone intentionally. And that goes back as far as, Exodus and the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. It's okay to wonder if that was what I'm trying to say. Is okay to wonder if that's an editor's note in there. It happens.
It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole different kind of morality at play here in there. And also in the part where you see all this duplicity and all the lying, which is used to accomplish God's purpose. They had a very different view of God at that point, of course, that they believed God was unlike what I was cautioning against, they believed that God was the author of both good and evil. They didn't have a devil to blame things on. They didn't have a Satan figure that was the author of evil, but they believed that all things that came about came because of God's will. And exactly. So all this, and very often we've seen it all throughout the Old Testament when people lie or things that we're taught in Sunday school not to do, but they do in order to accomplish God's purpose. And you've talked about that, Greg, the trickster mentality. So, yeah.
Other thoughts? Or
what seems to me is like, if you're the leader, why do you keep taking all this bad advice from these people?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, can't you think for yourself? You're in charge,
Right.
Think for yourself. Why do you take this advice without even thinking about it? Unless that's just the culture too, I don't know.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
The author
I mean, like I know our president today, he has a cabinet, they're advisors, but sometimes they do what they say and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes they fail him. And sometimes he's got to take the bullet for them. Yeah.
It works both ways. Sometimes not taking it's a bad thing. Sometimes it's a good thing.
Yeah.
You don't know, but it's like they seem to always take the advice, whether it's good or bad.
Right.
Usually ends up being bad.
I think that's why Greg's comment is insightful about it being a redaction, because they didn't really know at the time whether it was good or bad advice. Right. They're saying now the person that's writing it from the perspective of several hundred years later that it was bad advice, but they didn't know at the time. He consulted two different people. He decided which one. He had no way of knowing which would be most effective, but so.
I think it's about time that someone pointed out that David's a warrior.
Yes.
Like, he seems so willing, Absalom seems so willing to sort of take up, like, sleep with his concubines, rise up against him. And it's like, is this the same David we've been reading about the whole time?
It's like he's got two personalities.
Right.
And he just ran away. I'm like, weren't you a mercenary?
Where did the young warrior David go?
Did you kill your 10,000s? And it just seems, he seems kind of cocky to think he can take on his father so easily.
Yeah.
But
Is it mine? I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
It's not me. and it's a call I don't need to
take. Well, apparently Absalom had the numbers in his favor at that time.
Yeah.
Like grains of sand.
Yeah, and so this is kind of a fulfillment of prophecy too. What's going on with Absalom?
Fun with Hebrew words. The priest Zadok is almost exactly the word in Hebrew for righteousness.
Oh.
So that makes, if you're named righteousness, chances are you're going to end up being a priest. If you're in the Bible. My name does not mean righteousness. I want you to know. My name means vigilant. Oh, there you go. Charity's just a bit closer to.
Oh, yeah.
It's a bit like being named Charity. Yeah.
But you really want to be in this Old Testament Charity?
Yeah. All right. Leslie, would you like to finish, but with switch translations? Or do you want to use the same one you were doing?
I could go to the NRSV. I've gotten both in front of me. So we're 21.
21 on, yep.
And this is 17. Okay. Let's see. After they had gone, the men came up out of the well and went and told King David. They said to David, "Go and cross the water quickly, for thus and so has Ahithophel counseled against you." So David and all the people who were with him set out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, not one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. He set his house in order and hanged himself. He died and was buried in the tomb of his father. Then David came to Mahanaim, while Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Now Absalom had set Amasa over the army in the place of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra, the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. The Israelites and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobai, son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machor, son of Amiel from Lo-debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds, basins, and earthen vessels, wheat, barley, meal, parched grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from the herd, for David and the people with him to eat. For they said, "The troops are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness."
All right. I'm just reading some footnotes. Sorry, everyone.
So Ahithophel didn't like being made to
look foolish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Made to look like he gives bad advice. Yeah.
Or possibly there's a note in the NRSV, the New Oxford Annotated Bible, that he felt that this would mean that Absalom might be defeated, and he didn't feel, he probably felt that his reception by David after he had supported Absalom for a short time wouldn't be good. So he kind of just said, well, I might as well die. I've lost my chance. I'm out of there. Yeah.
Right. Better to do this than to be tortured or something, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absalom did not hang himself. According to the Good News Bible, it reads that he went under a large oak tree and his head got caught in between the branches.
Oh my gosh.
And the meal kept going and he was hanging.
Wow. That's what it says. Interesting.
Yeah.
Ahithophel, not Absalom, but yeah. He saddled his donkey, arose, went to the home, and he left to charge for house, and he hanged himself and died. Yeah, it's like he. Interesting. So there might be some.
What?
It wasn't intentional.
What one?
Good news.
Good news. Okay, because mine says he hung himself.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, I think what's going on is Diane's talking about what's going to happen to Absalom later on. That's how Absalom's going to meet his own.
Oh, got it. So it's kind of an echo of this.
Well, yeah.
Getting caught between two branches.
Sort of.
Could be he did it to himself.
Yeah.
I mean, being silly to walk between two branches.
Let's say the fact that this is from a Robert Alter footnote on Ithra. There are two different problems with the identification of Amasa's progenitors in the Masoretic text. So what does that mean? The Masoretic text, that's the civilization that came later and added vowels to all the Hebrew texts to make it a more sophisticated language in the actually post Jesus, somewhere around 500 AD, I think. So anyway, sometimes there's discrepancies is what that's supposed to say. The fact that the father is a member of another national ethnic group accords with the report that he had come to bed with Abigail, quote unquote. For that sexual term by no means necessarily implies marriage. I'm sorry to harp on all the sexual activity going on in here, but there is a lot, and it all has it's basically worth noting that when that happens, it's not necessarily, when it says who had come to bed with Abigail, daughter of Jesse, means there was not a marriage. This was not a relationship like that. I don't know how to parse out the meaning of the beans. What would you say, Leslie?
Might have said it was Ishmael married Abigail.
See, I think that's what this Robert Alter is trying to say, is the text disagrees. The original text disagrees with that.
Mine says that too.
And we would be conditioned to believe that, given all the activity with the concubines.
I'm not sure marriage in most cases was an official act in the same way that we consider it today. I'm not sure they had marriage ceremony. Maybe they had some kind of ceremony for kings and people like that, but most often people who were married they didn't go to the justice of the peace or someone and get married. There wasn't an official civil ceremony. They just started living together. There might be some things that they did in terms of the priest or something. I'm not really well aware enough of that, but really a marriage as an official act is a relatively recent phenomenon in terms of history.
Excellent. I think we can go on. Chapter 18, unless anybody thinks we're moving too quick. Very on brand. I'll read from Robert Alter's translation. Chapter 18. And David marshaled the troops that were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. And David sent out the troops, a third under Joab, and a third under Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. And the king said to the troops, I too will surely sally forth with you. And the troops said, You shall not sally forth, for if we must flee, they will pay us no mind. And should half of us die, they will pay us no mind, for you are like 10,000 of us. And so it is better that you be a help for us from the town. And the king said to them, Whatever is good in your eyes I shall do. And the king stood by the gate, and all the troops sallied forth by their hundreds and their thousands. And the king charged Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for me with the lad Absalom. And all the troops heard when the king charged the commanders concerning Absalom. And the troops sallied forth to the field to meet Israel. And the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. And the troops of Israel were routed there by David's servants, and great was the slaughter there, 20,000. And the battle spread out over all the countryside, and the forest devoured more of the troops than the sword devoured on that day. And Absalom chanced to be in front of David's servants, Absalom riding on his mule, and the mule came under the tangled branches of the great terebinth, and his head caught in the terebinth, and he dangled between heaven and earth, while the mule, which was beneath him, passed on. And a certain man saw and informed Joab and said, look, I saw Absalom dangling from the terebinth. And Joab said to the man informing him, and look, you saw, and why did you not strike him to the ground there? And I would have had to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. And the man said to Joab, even were I to heft in my palms 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not reach out my hand against the king's son. For within our hearing, the king charged you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, watch for me over the lad Absalom. Otherwise, I would have wrought falsely with my own life, and nothing can be concealed from the king while you would have stood aloof. And Joab said, not so will I wait for you. And he took 3 sticks in his palm, and he thrust them into Absalom's heart, still alive in the heart of the terebinth. And 10 lads, Joab's armor bearers, pulled round and struck down Absalom and put him to death. And Joab sounded the ram's horn, and the troops came back from pursuing Israel, for Joab held back the troops. And they took Absalom and flung him into the big hollow in the forest, and they heaped up over it a very big mound of stones, and all Israel had fled, each to his tent. And Absalom had taken and heaped up a cairn for himself in his lifetime, which is in the valley of the king, for he said, I have no son to make my name remembered. And he called the cairn after his name, and it is called Absalom's Monument to this day.
Oh.
So there was, Diane, you were just ahead a little bit.
Yep.
Gruesome and strangely particular way he's dying, which makes me think this was a common story that was told, in the villages over centuries of the peculiarities of this death. It's a bit like saying, oh, then Absalom, the way Absalom died was horrible. He was driving through Dealey Plaza, and it was open, and his head went back and to the left, and yet there was bullets from the back. Apparently, it's kind of like that. There's just a lore and a legend around it all.
I have a footnote that says the traditional interpretation of Absalom's accident, maintained by many modern scholars, is that he is caught in the tree by his remarkable hair.
Yeah, that's what it says here in my.
The cause of his pride now becoming the cause of his ruin.
Wow.
Yeah, because mine says Absalom's hair got caught in the tree.
Yikes.
His heavy.
But the one person saw him hanging there, and he just goes on.
Yeah.
Because it's not like his job to take care of it.
Right. Like, yeah. We've got a job to do.
Yeah. It's not my job, it's your job.
And he's still the king's son, right? It's out of my pay grade.
Well, right.
Yeah.
And so they have this argument, like, why are you standing there? And he's like, I'm not going to kill the king's son. You do it.
You guys can have arguments, but I know I'm not going to be the guy to do anything to the son of the king.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And of course, we get that section in 18, a cairn. I don't know what that is. I'm guessing that it's like a headstone, kind of.
I think it's where you.
It's a pile of stones over a grave.
Okay.
Yeah, because mine says he named the pillar after himself.
Yeah. I think it's where
okay.
you pile up stones till I remember something.
Got it. So there must have been a tradition where that existed, and everyone, little kid goes, Grandpa, why is it called Absalom's Monument? Well, that's where Absalom was buried, But he had no son to make his name remembered. And then, of course, they decided that was relevant to Scripture, so that's how that made in there.
It's interesting to me that Joab's the assassin again. Joab also killed Abner, who was part of the Saul's, and that was David was really angry with Joab supposedly, and anyway, so he was kind of the hitman on Abner, a relative of Saul. He's also performs the function of being the hitman on Absalom, who was David's son, and David's absolved of any guilt here, but doesn't talk too much about Joab paying a big penalty for what he did, in spite of what David supposedly said to the people. So anyway, this is a way that the biblical account is absolving David of guilt, and someone else is taking the hit for what had to happen there.
Right.
Maybe I missed it when you were reading it, but in mine, in 17, it says that they threw Absalom into a big pit in the forest and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. But then in 18, it says Absalom built this pillar himself in the King's Valley as a monument to himself.
Yeah.
Because he had no son.
Are those just two different locations?
Right. Yeah, it sounds like it's two different places.
Does anybody know what the word ignominious means? IGNOMINIOS.
Means like
infamous. Yeah, something that's really terrible.
So
it's
basically saying what Mary is saying. The brief notice in a pluperfect tense draws a pointed contrast with Absalom's ignominious grave.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's just acknowledging they're here right before your very eyes. This is another example of two different accounts in Scripture, and they're right next to each other.
Right. They're following each other.
Because they never take things out. They just add on.
Right.
If they're going to contrast it, So there's your example when people say Scripture is perfect. You go, oh, really? Look at 2 Samuel 17 to 18.
Then, of course, my fundamentalist friends would say he was probably buried ignominiously to begin with, but then they dug him up and reburied him someplace else, because they're very good at.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever you got to tell yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
to me, it says another tradition came 300 years later and said, oh, we heard a different story. Let's just add our part into. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's okay. It doesn't make it any less holy. Well, I don't know about holy. They're still sacred texts. Let's put it that way.
It's as true as we can make it.
It's as true as we can make it. Exactly. All right. I guess we should finish up this chapter. It's a little bit left. And then we'll see where we are. I'll finish up. And Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, had said, let me run, pray, and bear tidings to the king that the Lord has done him justice against his enemies. And Joab said to him, you are no man of tidings this day. You may bear tidings on another day, but this day you shall bear no tidings, for the king's son is dead. And Joab said to the Cushite, go, inform the king of what you have seen. And the Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. And Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, once again said to Joab, whatever may be, let me too pray, run after the Cushite. And Joab said, why should you run, my son, when you're not welcome tidings? Whatever may be, I will run. And he said to him, run. And Ahimaaz ran. Sorry, I'm taking out of that there's a parent going, whatever, just go. And Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain, and he overtook the Cushite. And David was sitting between the gates, and the lookout went up on the roof of the gate on the wall, and he raised his eyes and saw, and look, a man was running alone. And the lookout called and told the king, and the king said, if he's alone, there are tidings in his mouth. And he came on, drawing nearer. And the lookout saw another man running, and the lookout called to the gatekeeper and said, look, a man is running alone. And the king said, this one too bears tidings. And the lookout said, I see the running of the first one as the running of Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. And the king said, he is a good man, and with good tidings he must come. And Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, all is well. And he bowed down to the king, his face to the ground, and he said, blessed is the Lord your God, who has delivered over the men who raised their hand against the Lord my king, my lord the king. And the king said, is it well with the lad Absalom? And Ahimaaz said, I saw a great crowd to send the king's servant Joab, and your servant, and I know not what. And the king said, turn aside, stand by. And he turned aside and took his place. And look, the Cushite had come, and the Cushite said, let my lord the king receive the tidings that the Lord has done you justice against all who rose against you. And the king said to the Cushite, is it well with the lad Absalom? And the Cushite said, may the enemies of my lord the king be like the lad, and all who have risen against you for evil. And I'm just going to read into a couple of verses of chapter 19. We'll read those next week. And the king was shaken, and he went up to the upper room over the gate and wept. And thus he said as he went, my son Absalom, my son, Absalom, would that I had died in your stead, Absalom, my son, my son. And it was told to Joab, look, the king is weeping, and he is grieving over Absalom. And the victory on that day turned into mourning for all the troops, for the troops had heard on that day saying, the king is pained over his son. And we'll just stop there. There's more pain for David later, but we'll do that next time. So a little bit of it's like a Monty Python movie of someone going, let me run first. And then he overtakes him, and that means overtake in the British sense, which is you pass the car. You speed it, you go in the left lane and overtake them. And that's exactly what he did. And for some reason, the king is looking out as well. And so they've got a bunch of people saying, here comes a guy, he's got to have good news. And he can't even get the words out. My text had verse 29, he trails off like an ellipses, ... I know not what. And then the king basically, you can imagine just kind of pushing him aside and saying, let the other man come up here and tell me the news. And the other guy got a little bit oblivious, the Cushite, saying, may the enemies of the Lord, my lord the king, be like the lad, and all who have risen up against you for evil. He's done. He's dead.
So Joab tries to save Ahimaaz. Ahimaaz wants to go there. Joab realizes this is not going to be good news, so he chooses the foreigner, the Cushite, to send with the bad news, because he knows. And somewhere along the way, it seems that maybe Ahimaaz, a light dawned somewhat, and he didn't really give the bad news. He just gave the good news and left the bad news to the Cushite. So yeah,
right.
Doesn't say what happened to the Cushite after that, but I don't think they've killed the fatted calf and put the ring on his finger and welcomed him with the.
I don't think so. Yeah, I think it's safe to assume that David's grief overtakes him, and he just kind of wanders away. He's too distraught to do anything about it.
But it was a risky position to go have to tell the king.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I never want to let a Star Wars moment go by, and this is evoked in some ways in whether consciously or not. The end of the second film, The Empire Strikes Back, which is the best one, is the big reveal of Darth Vader being Luke's father, right? And there's a little bit of these parallels here of the fall from grace, you could say, for David. He's not quite Darth Vader, but his sins of the father being revisited is happening. And at the end of that movie, they're chasing Luke and his friends, and then they manage to fix the ship and fly off. And Darth Vader, through the whole movie, has been strangling with the Force, just killing all his officers every time they disappoint him. And so the officer in charge at the end, we're conditioned now through the movie 3 times now, he's killed the people that give him bad news. And at the end, because he's now shared with Luke this really personal news, he's conflicted. And even though he's just that black mask, you see him just kind of staring out the window, watching the ship get away. And he just kind of turns and wanders away. He's too emotional, too caught up in the relationship with his son to even bother with killing any more people that day. It's really amazing. This is very much evocative here. So there's how, if you wonder how my brain works for a sermon, that's where I start. Welcome to my world.
That's what makes them interesting.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe. Hope so.
I was just reading something, and I just thought this was weird. In verse 29, Ahimaaz was saying, in my version, it says, is it well with the young man Absalom? And Ahimaaz answered, when Joab sent his servant, I saw a great tumult, but I do not know what it was. Yeah. And I don't know, is he lying that he didn't know that Absalom was dead? That's what it says here. It says apparently Ahimaaz didn't know that Absalom was dead, but or was he lying just because he didn't know whether to give it? And then the Cushite thought it was good news that the Absalom was dead because he was his enemy.
Right.
And so it was like, that's good news that your son's dead, you know.
Yeah.
His son. So
it's a great point, Leslie. And Robert Alter says that it's nearly gibberish what Ahimaaz answers with. It's gibberish not because the text is corrupted or anything, but because he's been posed a question he does not dare answer. And so he begins to talk nervously and incoherently, just like we would, you know. So he's rambling. Well, I saw a great crowd, and the king's servant was there, and it was really pretty, and blah, blah, blah. You know, and King's like, oh, God, get this guy out of my face. Will somebody tell me what happened to Absalom? Right.
But would that depend on David's mood? You could see him being like,
right.
I've been running away from this guy. And
he's concerned, yeah.
Well, there could be some fear there of giving David bad news too, because you never know how is he going to take vengeance on the bearer of the news.
Exactly.
So you might not want
to
and there's that don't kill the messenger.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And David has done that in the past. He has killed the messenger. Right. Yes.
Yeah. So there's precedent for this.
You know, there would be a fear of that. Maybe I don't want to give him any bad news.
It's hard, but again, he leaves shaken. Is the Robert Alter translation? The king was shaken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and you know, exactly. Remember how we began this morning with David going, well, so that guy is shouting out, you know, blasphemous things about me, but if that's my punishment from the Lord, so be it. And then this, I mean, I think the authors would say this is the comeuppance for David. This is the real punishment, and this one is shaking him to his core. These are the results of his sin.
David probably realized that he probably was experiencing a good bit of guilt here. That if I had not done this, if I had not done that, maybe then Absalom might not have done what he had.
Still be alive, right? Yeah. Exactly right. Well, on that happy note, we'll see you all next week, and I'm going to bring in some Absalom material. I'm flying to a conference that day, but I think I'm flying late enough the day that I can be with you all. I may not physically be here, but I might be tuning in mobile.
I can be here
because I'd like to be a part of the discussion, because I know I'm not here the next week also. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Stay safe, everyone.
Take care, Dawn. Best wishes tomorrow.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.